Welcome back to another episode of Shop Talk. I'm Brad Goldberg, alongside Ohio State pitching coach Dan DeLucia, and we are very, very excited to welcome on Cam Castro. Cam is the pitching coordinator of the Milwaukee Brewers. Cam, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you guys having me. Glad we got to connect and do this and talk some shop.
Love it. A little background on Cam. He played college baseball at Lake Erie College. From there, he coached at IMG Academy in Bradenton, Florida. He then went to Defiance College as an assistant coach. From there, he was a trainer at Driveline Baseball in the Seattle area. From there, a brief stint at Augustana College. Back to his alma mater, where he was the head coach at Lake Erie. After a successful stint there, he was the high A pitching coach for the Carolina Mudcats, which is high A for the Milwaukee Brewers, and recently got named pitching coordinator for the Milwaukee Brewers. So a really awesome journey. We look forward to chatting with you about it. What are you doing now in these kind of unprecedented times with this virus?
Yeah, and you're so true. I mean, if anybody right now tells you they have the answer as to the best way to handle all this, I mean, I think we all are just handling it the best way we know how. And for us as an org right now, that's just trying to do a really, really good job on staying up in communication with our players, trying to keep our pitching group as a staff just connected and talking and communicating, but really just trying to track it, monitor, and almost kind of have tried to turn our PD structure into a remote model sort of thing, similar to what we would do in an off season, calling around the players, checking in, seeing how they're doing, what their workload is like, what kind of access to facilities do they have, to equipment. That seems to be a rather ever-changing landscape right now as more and more states deal with this shutdown and these stay-home orders. So just trying to, right now, I think is just trying to help our guys be creative with what they have, whether that's a home gym or a basement with a bucket of balls and a net, whatever it might be. Just try to stay up with them and make sure that they're able to get the most out of the current situation. So in the meantime there, I think it's just trying to promote them staying in a reasonable state of readiness is kind of the word or the moniker that we're going with. We all hope that we play baseball here sooner rather than later, and just gotta kind of continue to prepare for the unknown, which is difficult, but think that we're making do obviously as best as we can. So it's I think the other thing, part of it too, is one of those things that we're getting a lot of time right now and a lot of time on our hands that we didn't prepare for. So enjoying parts of that too. I know for me, have a wife and a young baby at home, so getting to spend a little extra time with our family that maybe I wasn't accounting for, which has definitely been a blessing. So enjoying that, but also trying to be conscientious that we do, whenever baseball season does start, whenever opening date is, that not only our players but our organization, our staff, we're ready to tackle that when it comes. So it's very much like you're in limbo or in purgatory, but we are taking it kind of one day at a time, which is, I think, probably the only thing we really can do in this situation. So
no doubt.
You
got something?
Yeah, just Cam, for those who don't know you and here in the game of baseball now, that a lot of college coaches out there, whether it be junior college, NAIA, Division 1, 2, 3, are getting plucked out of this the college world and into the Pro Bowl world. And obviously, you've had some experience with that. So can you kind of take us through your journey with regards to that into Pro Bowl?
Yeah, so I think that it was the first opportunity I had to speak with our organization about the position in Carolina last year was a little bit before the holidays, 2018. So late November, early December. And I think that really at the time, it wasn't something that was on my radar. I very much was happy and enjoying our program and our experience back at Lake Erie. I thought that we were doing some really, really good things in a very small window with a very young team when I got there, and was able to get into what I thought was a pretty productive position in that third year. So it certainly wasn't something on my radar. I think that as a coach, or just even as like, the competitor that comes with working in sport, you always want to know how successful you might be at the next challenge, whatever that might be. And so it's maybe always somewhere in your mind, but certainly probably wasn't on the forefront of mine. I think that where I was just have been really fortunate, and I'm not ashamed to admit, I think that I've been the benefactor of being in the right place at the right time. But also just while I was at Lake Erie and when I had gotten this opportunity, was so consumed with just doing the best job that I knew how, where I was. And I don't think that has ever really changed for me, whether it was going back to really my first stint in college baseball at Defiance, got to do the better part of almost 4 years there with Derek Woodley. Was really the first guy to kind of like give me a crack at coaching college baseball. So for that, I'll obviously always be grateful. And kind of did the same thing there for 4 years. Just you kind of wanted to do right by the guys that were right in front of us, and really put their development at the forefront of my mind, and which has always been something that's super important to me. So I do think you're right, though. I think in the last couple of years, you've seen this interesting transition of amateur coaches getting the opportunity to coach professionally, including for guys like myself who didn't play professional baseball. And it's an opportunity that, I think when you are presented with it, it seems very much like, all right, well, I want to be, what qualifies me for this? And I think that's maybe some guys' initial thought, but for me, I think it was just going into it really no different than when I went back to Lake Erie. I was like, going into Lake Erie, I'd never been a head coach before. I'd only ever been an assistant, and really just wanted to do the job the way that I thought it should be done, and did that day after day. So going into the first year with the Brewers, really had the same mindset, wanting to do the job in a way that I thought it should be done, and try to do right by the guys that we had in Carolina last year, and now transitioning into the role of trying to do right by every pitcher in our organization, and keep their development tracks at the forefront of my mind. So the other part too is there's a lot of good coaches in college baseball and in the amateur, and I don't even just say college baseball. You're starting to see, or you've already seen, guys who are coming out of the private sector and working into professional baseball as well. So I just think that we're at this really awesome time that good coaches just don't fly under the radar anymore. And whether it's you've done a really good job because of how your team has succeeded, or you've done a really good job in progressing individual development, or you've just done a really good job in documenting a well laid out, well executed thought process, very, very rarely do good coaches fly under the radar. So I don't see it as a trend going backwards anytime soon. And what I mean by that is that any organization, professional, amateur, doesn't matter, is going to want the best people for the job. And if any coach, whether I'm a current pro guy, I'm a college guy, I'm a private sector guy, if I can document or demonstrate that I'm pushing the industry forward, then I'll always be better off. And guys like that will always get noticed. So I don't know if that kind of touches on it or not, but
yeah, I have a two-part question, kind of piggybacking off that. The first one is, on a personal level, how was the transition into pro ball your first year as a coach? Not having played, it's a grind in the minor leagues, any pro ball for that matter. I want to know how you kind of transitioned from college and the recruiting and playing on weekends, maybe a midweek game, to the everyday grind. And was it, was it up to your expectations, or did your perception match reality? And then I'll just give you my second question after that, if you don't mind going into that one, kind of how it went for you.
Yeah, for sure. It was kind of exactly as you said. Having never been there as a player, you think you maybe have an idea of what to expect, but until you go through a 140 game season, you definitely don't. And that's okay, because I mean, I think as college coaches, or when, while coaching college baseball, we were, preparing all year long for this season that seemed to be forever away, right? You start in late August, early September, whenever it might be, you play a fall season, you've got an off season, and you're just kind of working towards this season that is inevitably coming. Where in pro ball, it's, we're going to get to spring training in late February, early March, and we're going to have 4-6 weeks, depending, to get ready, and then it's go time, right? And I think that the mindset that I tried to tackle was, it's 140 games, but almost more so looking at it as 140 just opportunities to help guys get better, and wanted to make sure that we had a lot of time and a lot of days, but I mean, it's also very scripted and set out. We have guys that are throwing every 5th day, and they're only going to throw one side and one bullpen, and your training economy has to change. But for me, I think that almost inevitably, my mindset going in is like, okay, I didn't play professional baseball. What battles may I incur just in that realm of, you didn't play, that I might run into, and really, and I think it's probably a testament to our organization to have ran into absolutely none. And I think part of it is we have very, very just like genuinely good people, from our staff to our players, who are very forward thinking, that want to get better. And I've heard this said a couple of times, and I really do believe in it, that if you have information that can help a player get better, whether it's advance his career, prolong his career, just develop as a player overall, he wants that information, right? And he wants it in a way that makes sense to him and is digestible and is actionable. And that's where good coaches come into play. And in my mind, that is a trait or a skill that is not related to your playing career. It's going to be related to your people skills and your ability to relate, communicate, and digest information yourself, right? Because I can't give something to a player if I don't fully understand it first. And then I have to lean on my relationship with him or my understanding of how he learns to help communicate that, so that he can put it into action. So long story short, I think that the transition was certainly unknown at first, but I think it revealed itself to be mainly driven by just my ability to communicate with people. And I think that's really what the number one skill set of a coach is anyway. So that being said, I do think that some of the time I spent in Seattle at Driveline, and some of the other things I've been fortunate enough to do in my career kind of prepared me for that, because I've always probably tried to be the outside of the box thinker, the one that was going to try to help shift the paradigm of player development. And that was what drove me to Seattle, literally drove me. I don't think I'd ever been west of Chicago, from, born and raised in Cleveland. I don't think I'd ever been west of Chicago before I packed my car and drove 40 hours to the West Coast. But wanted to make sure that in my profession, I wasn't going to leave any stone unturned to just try to get better myself, because I knew that would hopefully directly translate to the players that I was working with.
So my follow-up to that is, and you've touched on it multiple times already in this interview, is, everyone is in the coaching world is kind of talking about that difference between old school and new school, right? The new school being sabermetrics, Driveline, SQL, like all these different things, right? And the old school is I played, I know what works, right? How are you guys seeing that mesh? Or are there certain things that you like to pick brains of, a former big leaguer or a guy that has 5 years at Driveline or has created their own model or their own development curve? I know I'm kind of going broad, but can you kind of touch on how it's either being meshed or issues or positives that you're seeing to kind of eliminate that gap or flatten the curve that we're now kind of keeping relevant?
I like it. Multi-use for that term. I mean, obviously, I can only speak to my knowledge within our organization firsthand. But, I think the one thing that I've definitely tried to do, especially this year in this role, is ask questions, right? And ask questions of people who, I have no qualms about admitting are more experienced in areas than I am, because we're fortunate enough to work in an industry or, within our own organization where we just have a lot of, we have a lot of experts, and being kind of vulnerable enough to say like, hey, I don't have this experience, whether, like you said, it's in coding or it's in StatCast or it's in just playing experience. So talk to me about how what lens are you viewing this through? And I think that, I've always tried to refer to it as not so much as old school versus new school, because I think that we all go to the same school, and that's the school of just like wanting to help baseball players get better. Really what I think it comes down to is, are we, and I'm sure you guys have heard this before, are we of a growth mindset, or are we of a fixed mindset? And realistically for us as a staff, with like the people that are player facing, that work with our players every day, I know that it's very, very important for us as an org to, there's really only one mindset that's acceptable, and it's being of that growth mind, where you just like innately want to get better as a coach or as a staff member, or even as a player. And I think that that's really what I've been so just excited about within our org, is I think we are surrounded by a ton of those guys. But the big thing is, like I said, I mean, we have pitching coaches in our org that coach at different levels of our system that are way more experienced than I am, and that's totally okay with admitting that. Whether it's more experience as a coach, guys that might have 20 years in the game as a minor league instructor, guys that are more experienced as players, and being able to understand that I'm not there to supersede that experience of theirs. I'm not even necessarily there to enhance it. I'm really just there to be a resource to bounce ideas off of, to present opportunities, learning opportunities to, and to really just kind of put the best information in their hands as possible, and really just weaponize our coaches to put that in front of our players. And I think for me in this role too, the one thing that was probably initially was a little bit of a change or just difference was, for a long time I've been a coach of players, and now I am far more on the side of coaching coaches. And I think that that's what the biggest thing for our coaches that I've wanted to help them drive the bus on, is just putting really high quality information in front of them, driving very good, thorough discussions as a group that we all get better from, because we all, like Brad, to your point, we all have these different perspectives, and sharing those, because that's where we're all going to get better from. Hearing different points of view, hearing different anecdotes, and being able to relate that back to, like I said, really what we're here to do at the end of the day, which is help these guys, help our players push through their careers and develop into whatever that next stage of their path is. So to long-winded way to probably say, really have tried to, in every step of my coaching career, be vulnerable to what I don't know, and I think it's a pretty powerful, or at least I hope it's a pretty powerful weapon to be able to to know what you don't know, and ask for help. And that's really what I've tried to do kind of every step of the way. Slowly figure this thing out, as we are all continuous learners. So
I think there's some great nuggets in there.
Yeah, I think we've heard you just mentioned it, but a lot of the guys we've been talking to, again, at the highest level, which you're at currently, is that self-awareness. And even, like you said, understanding what you're not good at. So I think that's great. I think that's great feedback, personal feedback for yourself, but for others to hear as well. I had just a question on, so you mentioned you went to Driveline, and obviously there's Driveline's a kind of that, Brad alluded to new school. I think it's again, it's at the end of the day, it's information that a lot of people are craving. The learners that you talked about are craving. Can you give a little bit of your experience there, how it helped your career personally, but then what it's doing for the baseball world in general?
Yeah. I think so. I went to Driveline the winter of 2015, stayed through parts of 16 before I got back into college baseball, and was probably a place that, like, when I went, I was like, man, I could live here. I loved Seattle. I loved the company. I was like, I could live here for the next 5 to 10 years. But really ended up obviously getting not pulled back into, but called back into being in a dugout, and was obviously very, very happy with both decisions that I made to move out there in the first place, and then ultimately to get back into college baseball. But when I'll also say the company now, Driveline itself, is a much different company than when I was there in 15. It's amazing how things have changed in a very short amount of time. I think at ABCA, one of the cool statements that actually Mike Rathwell said is that the game has changed more in the last 3 years than probably it did in the last 30. And it's very, very true. And I think that initially when I went out there, my big driving force was just whatever. I think we all saw the change potentially coming. I don't know if we thought it would happen this quickly, but I knew I wanted to be a part of it. And I think that was what drove me out there. But the ability to work with just very influential, high quality, high knowledge people that are all now in really like different parts of the game, obviously between Mike and Kyle, both jointly running, serving in his current role with Driveline, but now with the Reds. Guys like Matt Daniels, who's with the Rangers, very, very just high level knowledge people that have stayed at Driveline, Joe Marsh and some others. But was also fortunate enough that we were able to, within our organization, we were able to also kind of, again, wanting to surround myself with as many people as we can to help grow our org. Was able to hire Brian Leslie out of Driveline as well, who's now our assistant pitching coordinator. He joined us in February. So we're obviously pretty thrilled about that addition. But I think the big thing in where Driveline was then versus where it is now is I remember working ABCA as an exhibitor at the Driveline booth in 2000, that would have been the winter of 2016 in Nashville. And I very much still remember people coming up and saying like, all right, tell me about this. Like tell me about these balls or whatever it might be. And, I've probably been to, 7 or 8 ABCAs now in a row, going this past year. Also back in Nashville, was just really cool to see how different it is, and that it's no longer about like, hey, tell me about Driveline. It's morphed into, okay, how do I best incorporate this into my program or into my skill set as a coach or whatever it might be. And that's really was probably when I was there, my larger role. There were kind of 2 joint pieces, which was both like training athletes on the floor, but also like getting on the horn with coaches and just kind of like talking to them about programming, which was, I think, probably where the first dive in my best actual preparation for my current role of coaching coaches, and then obviously inevitably then shortly after having the ability to be a head coach, manage a staff, and do some other things there that have definitely helped prepare me for my situation now. But now with where it is in the game, I think that I think that plenty of people will agree it's Driveline protocols, programming similar to it. It's not going anywhere, right? It is a part of our game, both on the professional side and the amateur side. Even just as you look at how rapidly it grew in amateur baseball, and every year more and more players are going into pro ball with working knowledge of this stuff, whether it's Driveline, whether it's TrackMan, whether it's Rapsodo, whatever it might be, because of its rampant growing population in college or in high school, that is then obviously pushing the envelope on more players into the pro system that are familiar with it as well. So I think that now I look at it as similar to how I did then, but now as an even more important tool for all of our coaches to have in their tool belt. And whether it's to know what a pivot pickoff looks like, or to be able to raise the green or the red paddle on, okay, that looks good, that looks a little off to me, or being able to dive in and get hands-on with the instruction component. Being able to at least make sure that we as an org or we as a staff have this base, we're all at least at this like kind of base level understanding of programming similar to or equal to Driveline protocols, because our players do it, or they are interested in it, or they have heard about it and want to try it, whatever it is. Being able to handle kind of a multi-leveled conversation on it. But I mean, you see it at the big league level all the way down to the lower levels of minor league baseball, and it's very much like I said, it's almost ingrained itself into the game. And I think Kyle's been quoted as saying the same thing that I'm alluding to, is that he thought that this would happen. He just maybe already knew that it would happen. I don't know if Driveline expected it to happen so soon. So I am by far a footnote in the history of that company. It wasn't the furthest thing from a major player there, but was very, very grateful to Kyle and Mike for bringing me on 5 or so years ago, and they've been very good to me since. I've really enjoyed seeing the growth of their company, and try to be as much of a resource for our staff and for our players. And now with, like I said, bringing Brian Leslie on board, that we are able to kind of cover that within our org, and feel really, really good about the level that we're able to talk about it with our players and with our coaches.
Love that. I want to talk to you kind of about how different players kind of have different development curves, right? So why a guy takes 7 years to reach the big leagues, some guys shoot to the big leagues, failure in the minor leagues. And kind of one thing that I was told when I was in high A, when I was playing, was, hey, what works here in the Carolina League, it's not going to work in the big leagues, or it might not work in the big leagues. And as much as we want you to have success short term, we want you to have success long term. And that kind of seems like, your sweet spot of kind of pushing development curves, or at least finding the best development plan per individual. And then can you maybe touch on how you're pushing that and driving those factors, so guys don't get sedentary, or think that because something's working against a low A hitter, it's probably not going to work against Chris Bryant in the NL Central.
Yeah, and that's, I think, okay, so the example I use that's hopefully trying to answer your question is the pitch design component, right? Which is obviously like if for anybody that read MVP Machine, it was in there with a litany of anecdotes or stories on it, or examples, and I think it's obviously very much a part of our game, but it's also not necessarily anything new. Not to get off on a rabbit hole or a tangent, but pitch design's been around forever, right? What's happened now is the game and the coaches we're in have just found new, different, better, whatever you want to say, ways on tracking it, on kind of like tangibly monitoring and developing it. So anyways, the point there is, I think it is a reasonable discussion to have with a player. If you're, like in your example, he's in high A and we think that, or anybody thinks that, like, and I actually think that there was a good article in The Athletic on the Indians and their organization, and I think they quoted Matt Blake, who's obviously now with the Yankees, and their development of Shane Bieber's changeup, Shane Bieber's slider, one of the two, I can't remember. But the moniker was basically like, hey, do you want to work on this pitch in the Carolina League, or do you want to work on this pitch in the American League Central? And that the earlier we can kind of maybe steal reps with various aspects of pitching development, the better. And I think that that's the big thing that not only we are looking to do, but as I'm sure most orgs are looking to do, is how do we set up these players, these individuals, to not only be successful where they currently are, but ultimately be successful where everyone wants to be, which is going to be the big league level. And whether it's driving different projects or different initiatives at that time earlier in their career versus judging, do we drive those later in their career, whatever it might be. But ultimately knowing that by the time these guys get to where they want to be and where we want them to be, obviously we want them to kind of have the most finished, polished arsenal possible, right? And that's whether that's from an actual tangible like pitch side, or it's an approach side, or it's a how I attack hitters, whatever it might be. I mean, I think that we are constantly looking to evaluate all parts of that. What pitches do I throw? Where do I throw them? When do I throw them? And really also understanding that every guy's a little bit different. And one of the things that I try to really stress to our players, to our staff, is that probably like what makes you different is also what makes you good. And we need to identify those differences and probably not look at them through like an odd lens, but look at them as, hey, these differences are probably actually your strengths. Because realistically, the more that you can be different, the better off you're probably going to be, right? Because no one wants to be average. And that's to say, we're talking at the tracks of minor league development. Now that changes a little bit probably as guys further up there, further kind of go through the system, go through the organization. And sometimes it's a little bit of a reset. The guy that, we've seen it, maybe the guy that succeeds in a high A and then gets his first crack at double A and is, takes a small, short step back, and that provides us as a staff a window of opportunity to again, try to push the envelope of development and what's going to then help this guy help him make the next step. But I think the big thing that we are constantly looking to do, like I said, whether it's a guy that's, an older guy that's later in his track and a younger guy that's earlier in his track, like you said, the guy that's been in the minor leagues for 7 or 8 years, or the guy that's shooting through the system, whatever it might be, we've got to evaluate like what makes this guy different. And then really just kind of sit down and be able to have a high level conversation with him. And when I say high level, I mean like he's understanding it at a high level. Because like I said, those differences are really probably his strengths. And whether it's I'm the high slot guy or I'm the high spin guy, whatever it might be, like what's making me different is probably also what's making me good or can make me even better. And that's probably always going to be the lowest hanging fruit, I think, is taking a guy's differences and doubling down on them to make them a strength.
That's awesome to hear. Kind of something that we do here, and some of the info that I kind of gather, and then Dan and I collaborate on it, is we call them outlier tendencies or outlier qualities. So if we have a guy who has an outlier quality, we want to enhance that strength. And you said double down. I kind of like that moniker. We kind of want to we want to up the usage of outlier qualities, especially at the college game. That's that you said it, man. It's low hanging fruit. That's good to hear from a guy of your stature. I have one quick follow-up question, I think, Dennis, only for you. Are you guys using like predictive models for some of your players with expected and values? I know that the game's really furthered in that regard. And I know that's kind of going down a little bit of a different rabbit hole, but I know minor league guys kind of have some you can see their expected against, and obviously with the pitch design process, you could see if a guy's, raw spin or total spin is through the roof, and that's going to play on a playground or in the big leagues in a silo. So I guess are you guys using predictive models in the minor leagues, or are you kind of using the eye test, or it's a conglomeration of everything?
Yeah, I definitely say we always are going to want to err on the sides of both. We want to be able to provide an assessment of to the player of like how he is currently performing, obviously, versus maybe not, but also like not overly getting too deterred by potential like bad results, especially if we think that what he's currently doing is, if we do believe that it's going to work out for him in the long run, we want to make sure that he knows that. But also, like, we understand that players are, for the most part, they're pretty outcome focused, right? Like I said, any example of, to your point of when do we potentially like talk to a guy relative to where he's at on his development curve. If we tell Brad Goldberg, like, Brad, we need you to throw more changeups because we want you to develop this pitch in low A, not in triple A. But your changeup is getting waffled, and you're like, why am I throwing this? I think that being able to have a conversation about the why initially is probably just as important, if not more important, than the how or the when. And being able to sit down with those guys and understand where they're coming from on wanting to, like I said, probably be a little bit more outcome focused, and be very conscientious of that. But also, understand that both, to your point, both sides are important. Like the quote unquote eye test or the traditional statistic model is going to be just as important as how we think a pitch or a player specifically will trend over the long haul. So really the answer to your question is both. We want to make sure we're covering both the current model, quote unquote, and what we think the future model will look like, but be wanting to be conscientious of both aspects. So, because ultimately, really, like, it's important to players too. Hey, where do you see me now versus where do you see me in 3 years is a question that a lot of players want to ask, or where do I go from here? And being able to have those conversations with them is a big part of it.
Good insight there. And just for a reference point for people, Cam's coordinating, I think we talked about at least over 100 guys between all your levels, right? And if you could just touch on, give, I guess, some listeners just a day in, day out, what you actually do. Now, you said like coaching coaches, but obviously, you have spreadsheets on guys and just an everyday, weekly, kind of what you do.
Yeah. So I think exactly kind of how you said, we have a lot of kind of people in what I just kind of called the pitching group, whether it's from coaches to players to front office members who are involved or heavily involved in the pitching development side of things, and really wanting number one to, I think that I view partly as my biggest role here is connection. And making sure that we have a very well-defined identity as a pitching group, and that everybody kind of knows what that is. Not kind of knows what that is, but does know what it is, and knows how it then, if I'm a player, for instance, knows how that fits to me. If I'm a coach, for instance, it knows how I know how I try to communicate that to the player. And then obviously people in our front office know what we're doing. Is a big part of it. So that's obviously a big step, and really probably being very much tested now by our need to stay up with each other while we're on this hiatus. But I think that wanting to develop, implement, engineer the identity or brand of pitching development in our org is something that's definitely at the forefront of my mind. And that's really probably more so how I view my role in all this is kind of like the environmental setup guy, whether it's trying to implement the philosophies or the ideologies that we want to talk about, or implementing or really helping our coaches implement the how we do it. And because really, like, those are the guys that are player facing. Our pitching coach in AA is the guy that's going to work with those 13 guys he's going to start the season off with, like, not me, not our assistant coordinator. It's him, right? And really, I think that wanting to ultimately just be the best resource for those guys, for our coaches, so that they can be the best resource for our players. But yeah, so I mean, spring training is and was probably a little bit of a different animal there. We're building guys up, we're monitoring workload, we're wanting to make sure everybody's kind of getting ready for the season, which, it's April 1st now. It's supposed to be, like, I think 8 days from now. But that's a little bit of a different animal. But I think that we were and still are very much in the place of just, like, wanting to provide the best, most holistic approach to pitching development, and doing that through constant communication with our staff, who's then driving that through our players. So I really, like I said, to put a bow on that, I think in the coordinator role, I don't know if I view it a ton differently than what my role as like a head coach was. Just trying to set the tone and then empower our people. And that's really what it comes down to. When I was at Lake Erie, tried to empower our coaching staff, our pitching coach, our hitting coach, our volunteer, and then obviously empower our players to go out there and just kind of, like I said, understand their strengths, understand what makes them different, and set the kind of plan and action as to what do we want to be about, what's our identity, and then just kind of turn them loose. And I don't know, I think I see a lot of similarities there in between that job and this current one. So a couple more guys that fall under that umbrella now, like you said, probably well over 100 between both our complexes in Arizona, from all the way down to the Dominican as well. So I think the biggest thing I try to challenge myself on is being the best resource and providing the best environment possible.
I just had one. That's great. I think that's huge for people understanding what you do on a daily basis. And you went into it a little bit there, and kind of when you said no different necessarily than being a head coach. One follow-up question to that. What advice would you give? I guess you've now seen college players versus professionals and the differences there. So if you could jump back into college, what advice would you give, or even high school kids as you were recruiting, what advice would you give them from what you've seen now on the professional side?
I think that you do still see a lot of similarities. Obviously, the college or the high school guy just has other things on his plate, right? He's got school and he's got classwork and he's got, okay, what might my career be? Or I've got just other factors at play. And that's not to say that pro guys don't have other factors at play. Obviously they do. But I think the biggest thing I'd tell an amateur player after kind of seeing this side of it is, invest. Be very, very conscientious of how you invest your time, how you invest your energy, how you invest how you invest in the people around you. And I think that's what you see a lot of very successful people do, is they're very good investors, because how you invest and how you choose to invest, where you choose to invest, that's going to determine like your yield and what you get in return. So that's probably the biggest piece that I would try to tell a college or a high school player is just to be pretty conscious of how you invest your training time and how you invest time into just like bettering yourself as a person, into what you're working on, and kind of everything that falls there in between, because it very much is an investment into yourself. And I think that the average amateur player probably has not a ton different goals than the average pro guy, in that he wants to become the best player he can, and just ride it out and see where that takes him. So the only way that that either guy is going to get there is if he's really, really smart about, how he invests his time. So that's probably the one thing that I think is pretty applicable across the board there, is just, we call it, whether you call it training economy or you just call it, like I said, how you're spending your time. It's probably the most important factor. So, for us on the pro level, guys are, like you said, if I'm in high A, or if I'm in, some point of a full season roster, I've got 140 games. I've got a lot of bus trips. I've got day games, night games, short turnarounds, whatever it might be. It is a pretty long season. The college, I'm not actually sure what's the game. I know at Division II we were playing 50 games. I don't know what Division I is that now. Is it 56?
Yes.
Somewhere along there, right? So you're kind of drastically increasing the workload and the bandwidth a little bit. But I think that how each player in that situation, whether I'm playing 56 games or I'm playing 140, I need to treat it all the same, and the really good ones do, I think. So
I love that, man.
Really good. Yeah. Really good.
Really, really good. I think the more people we talk to, the more it's evident. I think you laid it out some really good lines there about investing, and I think the guys that we have more from the playing side and even the mental side kind of showed that through their talks and how much they're doing, but how aware of what they're doing as well. Whether it's the mental side, the training side, the pitch development side, it's you can bucket them, but they all fall under what you're calling the training economy. Where it's not, a lot of times it's not a mistake that these guys are having success. You know what I mean? We talked to Lucas Giolito yesterday, and he was talking about the guys that never fail and just shoot straight to the big leagues. And he's like, it's a decimal point of a decimal point of 0.00001. A lot of people need to fail their way there, and they kind of need to make adjustments and adapt to what works. So I think that's so cool to hear that from a guy who's on the the coordinating side. I have one more question. We'll let you go, Cam. When we were all together, you Dan and I at Pitchapalooza in Nashville, you were talking to us a little bit about the Brewers' new pitching lab that you guys invested in there in Maryville. Can you kind of talk to us a little bit about the tech you guys have in there and how you're unleashing that, and as much as you can give without the proprietary stuff going out there?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, like I said, I feel very, very fortunate to work for an organization that is on the front lines of player development, and I truly believe that we are. So what I would say that what we're doing, and really what my effort is, and I've told our staff, like, it's probably no longer, not probably, it is no longer a separator to have an Edgertronic camera or a Rapsodo set up in your bullpen, or in your lab, or whatever kind of name or moniker it has. It's no longer a separator. The separator is what you do with it, and how you communicate the information that comes out of it. So that's really where I'd say that my primary focus is because that I don't, for the most part, how many tools do we have that the other 29 organizations don't have, right? Those are, again, the separators in just the realm of technology and baseball, they are becoming less and less every day. Where the true ground to gain still lies, in my mind, is in the people that are in those situations, that are player facing in those situations, and and then obviously in how we communicate it to the player so that he can go out, on the mound realistically by himself, and put it into action. So Obviously we're doing a ton on the tech side, but I think that for us it's delving into a lot of what you're kind of seeing across the industry right now, which is wanting to identify what a guy's strengths are, what his differences are, teach him how to use those weapons, help them develop new ones where the time and the situation is prudent, and then from there just can try to continually track and progress their development. So in terms of like the actual tech that we're using, similar to what most elite or high level college programs such as you guys are using as well, between high speed cameras and ball flight tracking tech, whether it's TrackMan or Rapsodo, we are going to kind of obviously employ a lot of those same weapons, where I think that I hope our true competitive advantage lies is not in what we have, but in how we use it. And so like I said, I think that realistically your average setup is now inclusive of a high-speed camera, of a Rapsodo, of a TrackMan unit, whatever it might be. Like that is now what I've kind of coined, or I'd like affectionately refer to as like general admission. It is now like setting that up is now what gets you in the door. It is no longer what like gets you past the velvet ropes of VIP. VIP is still, in my mind, reserved for the guys that can weaponize that tech the best ways, and obviously see the results that it yields outside of just the vacuum of a training session. And realistically wanting to make sure that we as an organization are we're not trying to buy or settle for general admission tickets, that we are wanting our players and our staff to very much try to take more of the VIP mindset, because like I said, I don't think that you go to any minor league baseball park in the country, you go to most Division I games, you're going to see a very, very similar setup in all of those bullpens, right? And I think that's the beautiful challenge for us as coaches is like, we're not facing anything that you guys aren't facing in terms of, all right, we've collected all this. Now, how do we best put it into action, right? How do I make sure that this Rapsodo bullpen report, that this guy can like understand what I'm talking about, that he that I can in a very like reasonably, or I should say like well-intentioned conversation, get him to understand what vertical movement is, and be able to also as a coach be able to break it down in different levels, right? Because that's really where I try to challenge our staff on is like, it's all well and good to be the guy that like can only talk about things like at this really high level, like that guy has a ton of value. But really we need to be able to talk about this stuff at this level here, but also here, and everything kind of in between, because we need to be able to curtail our message to our audience. And that's where the communication bit comes in. So anyway, in terms of what we're doing, like I said, I don't know if our setup is going to be, our setup is the general admission. That's what I really believe that. But what we do with it from there, that's hopefully, where our players get the VIP treatment. So that's just kind of a corny analogy we've been using a little bit, but I think that it plays because it's accurate, right? You go to any game in the Southern League, you're probably going to see a similar bullpen setup. What you're not going to see is the conversation that coach has with the player behind the scenes, so that the next session or the next time they go out there, that they can get even more done, or they can move on to the next task or the next project, or they can just have a good discussion on their last outing and how that then dictates their next training session. So like I said, I think that's where baseball is going. 3 years ago, I think it would have probably been enough to just like know what a Rapsodo was and like how to read a report as a coach, but that's just not enough anymore. And it really is. It's true. Like it's changed so rapidly. I remember 2015. No, that would have been 2016. Rapsodo came and did I think their first ever like live field, quote unquote, demo at Driveline. Like we set up the Rapsodo and threw in the parking lot in Seattle because I think we were a little like the lights inside were a little wonky. And that was 2016. We're sitting here in 2020. Like that was 4 years ago. And we were setting up like the first ever field demo test of Rapsodo in the parking lot in Seattle, right? And 4 years later, it's not enough to just set it up, right? And that's where I think that the next growing wave, and not only like professional baseball, amateur baseball is as well, is now that everybody's playing field is leveled and that everybody has the same tools, like who's going to separate themselves now?
I have a fun story I'll leave you with about Rapsodo. In 2016, I was playing for Team Israel in a qualifier in Brooklyn, New York, to then make the big boy tournament of the World Baseball Classic. And I had the pleasure and honor of playing with Craig Breslow, who's maybe the smartest man I've ever met in baseball. And Craig walks into the locker room in Brooklyn, New York at Penn League, the Cyclone Stadium, and he's got this big bag, and he shows us this like piece of equipment, piece of tech. He's like, yeah, some company wants me to kind of test out this beta version of this thing. And long story short, Craig Breslow was like one of the first players with Rapsodo. And this was 2016, what you're saying. And thinking about it now, like being able, like what you said, all like I think about and Dan and I talk about is making it digestible for the player. We don't like saying dumbing it down, but can you make it palatable? You know, we don't want to sound smart. We want our players to understand it, and guys are definitely going to understand different terminology or different, you know, whether it's visual or it's, you know, some guys are numbers based guys. It's all about making it digestible, but I thought that was a fun story. And kind of how we're using it. So we can't thank you enough for coming on. This was a really high level conversation, but I think again, you made it digestible, and it was really fun to have you on. So thank you so much, Cam.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. It's, and the cool part I think is conversations like this are what drive the game, period. So, you know, the more that people can connect and I don't want to steal your line, but I'll give it a plug to talk shop. You know, the better off we'll all be. So I appreciate you guys carving out some time for me for sure.
Awesome. Thanks, Cam.
Yeah.
All right,
Thank you guys.
Thanks, Cam.
All right. Take it easy, fellas. Take care.